If you grew up watching Adult Swim and recognize this image here, or better yet, you can hear this image, you had a good time growing up because you got to experience the rise of Flying Lotus. Probably better known for his earlier work as a music producer, DJ, and rapper, Flying Lotus had his sights aimed to go beyond music, and eventually started working on short films, directing segments in anthology movies like VHS, and doing short projects with other big names like the late great director David Lynch. Following on the heels of the comedy horror movie Kuso, Flying Lotus's first big directorial release, which I have yet to see, comes his latest theatrical release in Ash. Not knowing anything about the movie, aside from seeing that Flying Lotus was the director, I was already excited to see what we were going to be getting. Advertised as a sci-fi horror film, I was beyond hyped to see what his vision for the future would look like. And just going to say before I get into this, there will be spoiler talk in this just so you know why I walked out of this movie feeling very disappointed. Well, we did have a decent round of positivity going on this channel for a good while, but some things got to come to an end, so hey, what's good everybody? It's your boy, DatChicken, part of the Chicken Wang Gang crew, and I'm here to give you my honest thoughts and opinions about Flying Lotus's latest theatrical release, a movie that took me a few days to process. I want to talk about Ash. Okay, so I'm going to try my best to summarize the plot of this movie without looking at IMDb. So Ash follows the story of a space researcher that goes by Riya, played by Isa Gonzalez. Upon waking up after what appears to be a deadly accident in a space outpost, and realizing she doesn't recall any of what happened, she's struggling to put the pieces together while also trying to find out what happened to the rest of the crew and what was going on at this science outpost on an unknown planet. While all this is happening, she's plagued with images of what may or may not have happened leading up to the incident, so she already starts off not trusting herself, which makes her encounter with Brian even more awkward. Riya encounters Brian, who is responding to some kind of distress call that came from the outpost, but having not met him before, she's on edge, not knowing if she can fully trust him, while he's also attempting to get her to leave the outpost before their oxygen levels run out. Riya, not wanting her crew's effort and research to be in vain, intends to stick it out and piece together as much of the mystery as possible before her oxygen runs out and they have to leave the outpost. I mean, that sounds pretty easy to get as far as a sci-fi concept goes. In fact, it doesn't sound all that different from a lot of other bigger sci-fi films or even video games. Some obvious throwbacks would be the Alien franchise, Dead Space, throwing a little bit of Event Horizon, and The Thing in the last couple of minutes of the movie. And you have a sci-fi concept that has worked numerous times before. So why did I find it so lackluster? So one thing that this movie does that I don't like about a lot of other Hollywood horror movies is that they have a reliance on jump scares. And this movie has a very moody atmosphere. It doesn't even really need to rely on that because the shadows and the lighting is doing a lot of the heavy lifting already. But then there are parts where Riya is trying to piece together parts of the puzzle, and then it's just like gory image, loud sound for no reason. And they did set up a really good jump scare early on in the movie with they had something look like it was going to attack Riya, but then it just ended up being Riya having a bad dream. And I'm like, that was really good. Why can't we apply that to more of the movie? But it starts to kind of even out near about the last third of the movie where the jump scares actually serve a purpose. It's just too bad that it took so long for the movie to get that far before they realized that, this is kind of old. So regarding our main protagonist, Riya, she has to carry a lot of this movie on her shoulders as it is her story, and you also toss in Aaron Paul as Brian, who is the unknown factor in all of this. Is he a company yes man here to retrieve something on behalf of the company? Is he actually from another nearby space station? Why is he so focused on completing whatever the mission is? Riya has a lot to think about with the arrival of Brian to the outpost, and while we follow her and the various decisions she has to make throughout the movie, I just never found her character to be compelling, and it gets worse as the movie goes. And as a side note, I know they brought in Iko Uwais for this project, whom a lot of people probably recognize from other martial arts movies, particularly the Raid series. For such a recognizable face, I figured he'd have more to do here, but sadly he has probably only 5 minutes total worth of screen time, but yes, he does spend some of it doing martial arts stuff, but it felt like anyone could have filled the role of his character anyway still. So Isa Gonzalez as Riya in this movie. Throughout most of the movie, she is just straight up gorgeous. So much so that it's almost distracting, especially considering how much she's getting tossed and beat around and just the environment is crazy where she's in. Like, she should not look this great. It looks like they picked her up out of a photo shoot for most of these shots. And that's not really too bad of a thing. It was just something I noticed, and I feel like she's best when she's in her action scenes or when she's putting together parts of the puzzle, because she can emote really well, and she looks like she's actually learning something. Her facial expressions are great. But I feel like she's at her weakest when her and Brian have to have conversations with each other, because they kind of go on for a little long, and then you get to see her acting is just, or her delivery is just not that great. And like, that's not entirely her fault, but it's noticeable sometimes. And it's also kind of disappointing that her character actually takes a back seat when there are dialogue scenes between her and the crew that happened in the past. Because I get that they probably want to try and build up these other characters that we won't be interacting with or seeing much at all in the movie, but they feel like a tight-knit group, and Riya just kind of feels like she's observing most of the time. And so that was a little disappointing, but they also make Riya a lot more reactive in the last third of the movie. Instead of just waiting for things to happen, when she finally figures out what's going on, she's on it. So good on her for that. And speaking of visuals, this movie goes between being amazing to sometimes just straight up terrible. Early parts of the movie make use of a face melting effect you could probably replicate in After Effects to give off a gory horror vibe. It's very in your face and it's used multiple times, and as seen in the trailer, there is some kind of floating presence in the sky, but it's never really mentioned or focused on again after you initially see it, and it's probably just there to add to the movie's overall mysterious and alien vibe. Some transitions even look like they involved AI in some way due to how unusually static objects might slowly shift while looking unusually smooth as you would with AI-generated images. And it's obvious the movie didn't have a massive budget, so they used a lot of lighting tricks and recycled set pieces to their advantage quite frequently here whenever they could. Sometimes it works, sometimes the sets look like something you'd see out of an early 2000s sci-fi film. Think Jason X type of sets, except with much darker lighting, or even Doom from 2005 with some of the first-person camera angles they used. There was even a part where they showed the face of a character who was killed, but it was hard to accurately see their face and the damage that was done, and it almost looked metallic, like there was an alien-style android as part of the crew, but no, their head was bashed in, and the effect they used along with the lighting made it visually confusing for me. So it's like there's even a part of this movie where it forgets it's a sci-fi thriller and turns into a music video shoot where Riya and one of the crewmates she was involved with, they walk for a while and then they find something that looks like an abyss and they stare down into it, and that unlocks a memory within Riya where she remembers the crew walking to another part of the planet and finding this alien technology that's being used to terraform the planet. And these parts actually look pretty cool, because I mean, it's like they use great use of drone shots to make the crew look like they're walking on a planet that's actually way bigger than it is, so it's believable that they traverse this planet in some form or another. And oh my goodness, I have to give a massive call out to the spacesuit designs in this. I mean, it looks like a standard spacesuit, but it also takes obvious inspirations from other movies in the sci-fi genre. In fact, almost looking similar to the spacesuits used in the Callisto Protocol, if anyone even remembers that one. So given that I've spoken about this movie so far, I wouldn't say that I've been overly harsh on it. Yes, it's a very slow build-up to the finale of the movie, in which all will be revealed, but it's the getting there part that annoyed me, along with the movie trailers making this look like it was going to be primarily a lot of blood-soaked chaos with space vampires or zombies running around. I was low-key expecting Event Horizon. I felt like even if that wasn't the case, the build-up would be worth it in some way, but this is where we have to get into spoilers, because while the climax of the movie brought everything around from earlier to try and get it to work, it also kind of made me feel stupid because I left with more questions than answers due to potential plot holes in the movie. So, spoiler time! Riya was the one behind it all. It is all her fault that all this chaos happened at the space outpost. It is because she discovered this little alien parasite that was living within the machinery of the station, and she saw that it had self-replicating properties and decided to take a piece of it and put it inside of a small glass petri dish, where it self-replicated enough to break out of the petri dish and then proceeded to infect the other crewmates. First, it went into one of the crewmates' mouths, which kind of turned him into some kind of like hulking zombie, kind of like 28 Days Later. He was just mad and wanted to fight, but Riya actually ended up killing that crewmate, and then once the host is dead, then the parasite moved on to another crewmate who actually ended up being the person that Riya was involved with. And so as this guy is turning, Riya sends one of the other crewmates in a spacesuit out of the outpost to go get some help. And during that time, this infected crewmate is actually killing Brian, which, keep that in mind, Riya comes back later and kills her involved crewmate, and then the parasite ends up infecting Riya through a small little gash in her head, and that it somehow moves up to her brain, which prevents her from becoming some kind of 28 days later raged out monster. So yeah, it was all her fault. So then if Brian was dead in the ventilation ducts for days, who was Riya actually talking to this whole time? Well, turns out, that's right. It was me, Barry. It was me all along. I was the parasite in your brain gaslighting you this entire time, and Brian was a way to convince you to get off the planet so the infection could spread. The parasite even talks in subtitles to Riya, which almost felt like I was watching an Overmind mission briefing from a Zerg mission in StarCraft. Ultimately, Riya uses the same healthcare robot that the Brian hallucination brought with him to the ship to remove the parasite, and that's the end of that. So it's been over a week, and one part that still, bugs me is the movie puts emphasis that the hallucination brought the space medical robot to the station and then operated on Riya to seal the parasite in her head, but at the same time, I understand the most obvious solution is that the med robot was probably there and Riya operated on herself, but they make an extra point to emphasize that the fake Brian, the hallucination, brought the med robot to the outpost and then proceeded to operate on her. They could have just had the medical robot there and then had him use it to operate on Riya. So that was just, maybe it's a plot hole, but that just kind of bugged me since it felt like an obvious fake out. And yeah, the last 10 minutes of the movie were pretty much what I was hoping most of the movie would be like. We get the whole crew, we get something bad happening, and then we work up an actual solution once we start to put the pieces together and get some actual intrigue going. And sadly, the end of the movie just kind of reminded me that Riya is the worst. She got her entire crew killed. Once the parasite got removed from her head, she allowed it to go and reanimate Brian's dead body. And that is how we pretty much get the final end boss monster of the movie, which harkens back to The Thing, maybe some Dead Space. And Riya also gets to use the all-time classic sci-fi thriller weapon, a flamethrower, in which case she dispatches the monster, and hey, she's pretty much ready to leave the planet. And despite the terrible demise that the rest of her crew has met, mostly due to her own hubris, she is all smiles as she leaves the planet and goes back to the outpost in space. And I was very anxious to leave the theater once the credits started to roll, but there is a post-credit scene, so it doesn't take too long to reach it, so if you feel like hanging around, check it out. Why not? So in conclusion, with all the build-up, the repetitious dialogue, the fake-outs, the cheap jump scares, I just was not fully invested in that first hour of the movie where I should have been invested the most. And as great as the finale was, it wasn't enough to redeem everything I'd seen up to that point. And I would love to see Flying Lotus' next theatrical release because I support this man and his artistry, but the artistry in this one just went way over my head. And even though this movie is just slightly over an hour and a half, this movie felt like it dragged on for 2 to 3 hours from my viewing experience. This is my first big disappointment of the year so far. I would not recommend it, but if you are dead set on watching it, just wait for it to hit Shudder. It'll be there soon. So with all that said about Ash, I'm going to give the movie 3 out of 11 chicken wings. I sat with this movie for a couple of days to try and give it a fair review, and while I like some of the art direction, loved the score, and despite the budgetary limitations, they pulled off something decent here. The non-linear way the story is told didn't really do any favors in keeping me invested in Riya's journey, and ended up being more confusing than anything. I left the movie feeling baffled, but at least the movie didn't have me feeling like I wasted my time, which to me is one of the greatest sins a movie can do. I saw something unique, but it just wasn't for me. And that's my review for Ash. I have another review for The Presence coming up soon, so I'm hoping I have better things to say about that movie next time. We'll be trying to get that out by the weekend or on Monday, so stay tuned. And while I'm over here working for your likes and subs, please let me know if you have any criticism, compliments, or advice in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you come through for the next one. Yo yo!